very, very important in and of itself. Appalling humanitarian catastrophe unfolding day by day. Of course, there are big implications not only for British politics, but most germanely for US politics and the presidential election. The news now overnight that two of Benjamin Netanyahu's hard-right coalition allies have threatened to quit the government if he goes ahead with the truce deal outlined by Joe Biden. You may have seen this on Friday. US President saying that Israel had offered a new roadmap towards a full ceasefire, including the release of hostages held by Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip. But Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, said his party would dissolve the government if the deal goes through, describing the proposal as a victory for terrorism and a security risk to the state of Israel. Agreeing to such a deal is not a total victory, but total defeat, he said. Well, let's get the thoughts of Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project, former peace negotiator, advised several Israeli prime ministers. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. Can you just explain to our listeners who perhaps maybe won't necessarily be familiar with all the details, why has Itamar Ben-Gvir reacted in such a hostile way to this plan?
Well, indeed, Lewis, your listeners would be excused for thinking this is a bit curious, isn't it? The American president says, here's the Israeli proposal.
Yeah.
And Hamas, you better accept this. And then our own foreign secretary comes out and says, yes, those of you who've been protesting, well, now we all know who you need to be telling to accept this. It's Hamas. And pause. Hamas comes out and says, we are looking at the details. We haven't received the plan, but we will engage constructively and positively. Just to note, Hamas, obviously, it's difficult to communicate with the military resistance, armed leadership on the ground, presumably in tunnels, etc. But you then have Israel's prime minister over the weekend during the Sabbath. And so we didn't get the response of some of these coalition allies until the Sabbath ended last night, the Jewish Sabbath. Yeah. So Israel's prime minister comes out and says, well, as long as our conditions are met. So already head scratching, but wasn't this your proposal in the first place? And then you have ministers in his governing coalition on whom he depends for his majority. And, Lewis, really important to note, many parliamentarians from his own party, from the party of Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying this can't be accepted. Pull back the curtain. What's going on? Biden has decided to go public with a deal because he apparently correctly assumes that the Israeli prime minister is not being straight with his cabinet, with his people, with his own coalition. And so they're trying to ferret out what is the Israeli position and to generate pressure. And Biden gave really an Israeli victory speech, full of things that are perhaps not too accurate, but never mind. And now the question is, will this move forward? Because where we've been stuck for months with the devastation that you referenced in Gaza, with the hostages still being there, with thousands and thousands of dead civilians, of children, with this humanitarian crisis, where we are stuck is, will there be a brief pause and then more devastation, which is the Netanyahu position, or will there be a ceasefire, which is what the US is putting forward? And, we just have to acknowledge it, hard as it is, this has been the Hamas position. And Israel is apparently not willing to go there. This is Biden upping the ante, trying to increase the pressure. But I think that for Netanyahu, if he risks losing his coalition, then this may well not be sufficient pressure. It may take the things that Biden has been super reluctant to do. He's flirted with the idea of withholding weapons, but he's not put up that on the table. There are not tangible consequences for Israel, despite the rulings of the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, etc. That's my attempt to explain where we are, Lewis.
Do you think there is any potential way through for Netanyahu? And do you actually think that Netanyahu wants a deal at this point?
So the families of the hostages, or many of them, were out on the streets in Israel protesting again last night. This is a regular occurrence. Most of them are convinced that bringing the hostages back is not the priority for their own prime minister. The assessment is that Netanyahu has set a bar, this idea of total victory. It won't be reached, it can't be reached. The war has undoubtedly degraded Hamas, but it is far from what Netanyahu hoped to achieve, and in many respects it's not going well. One of the reasons the Americans think maybe he'll eventually come round to a deal is that there is exhaustion in the military. If you want to quieten the northern front, if you want to get the hostages back, there are reasons Israel should go for this. But for Netanyahu, politically, he knows that the day after the war, he has to face the music for how did October 7th happen? What have you prioritized? What is your vision going forward? It works better for him politically, for him to continue to be a wartime prime minister, to not risk his coalition. And therefore, he has been the naysayer. And the ultimate decision will be what looks worse for him. Thumbing his nose at the Americans or risking his own coalition. And only if the equation which says there are deeper costs, and that comes to the UK as well. Will the UK make public the legal advice on transferring weapons? Because that influences the Americans also. So will the cost of going forward with the war outweigh the cost of bringing it to an end? And so far, that equation hasn't worked out in that direction, Lewis.
Finally, Daniel, if you had to bet your house on it, do you think that there will be at least some form of ceasefire have taken place by the presidential election in November?
I think that if you're looking at a November horizon, it's conceivable that there will be a different phase of this war. There will be military operations, but hopefully not the intensity, the daily civilian mass killing events of Palestinians, the extent of the humanitarian crisis, Israel preventing the aid going in, that we see now. But that might be, as you noted early on, that might be too late for President Biden.
Daniel Levy there, president of the US Middle East Project, former peace negotiator, as I say, has advised several Israeli prime ministers, not exactly holding much hope in the near future of any of this particular peace plan getting much traction as a result of the internal politics of the Israeli government, which is basically all of the politics which really matters right now.